SPICE on Zoom. I'm Bob Wolf, and on behalf of the SPICE Committee and the Program Subcommittee, I'd like to thank you for joining us for what we are sure is going to be a fascinating speech by an expert on a really, really interesting topic. Just a couple of quick notes before we get started. Tomorrow is the second of our JFS food drives. The pandemic especially has increased our awareness and the need to act on food insecurity in our community. And JFS always works hard to provide food as part of its ongoing pantry program. So if you have food to deliver, especially if it's Passover food, to help make people have a good Passover, you can drop it off tomorrow at the JFC. And you can also, if necessary, if you can't make it, you can write a check to JFC or go online and make the commitment through credit card. But if you do either of those, please make sure to memo somewhere that it's for SPICE so that we get credit for it. And later in the year, you'll understand a little bit more about why that is. So please open up your hearts and open up your pantries. Today, we are privileged to have with us Rabbi Yoseph Groner from one of the most respected of Charlotte's clergy, the rabbinate, and he will talk to us about the Kabbalah, a fascinating subject, and you'll hear a little bit more about him. Stefan Pinkney, who's the vice chair of our program committee, will introduce him in just a second. Quick reminder that all SPICE programs are recorded. All the Zoom programming is recorded. You can go up to the SPICE page on the Bethel site and take a look at them. Some people are even using them for family or book clubs and so forth as the basis for discussion groups. Wednesday, April 7th, to sleep or not to sleep, that is the question, with Dr. Nicole Fox, who is an expert on sleep and will help us to understand what sleep is and especially how it affects people in our age brackets, and some hints to how to work to get the best sleep we can. And then on Wednesday, April 21st, Rabbi Knight will talk on the wisdom of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, which should be fascinating also. So we hope you all will join us. And lastly, those of you who have received the challah last Friday, congratulations. I have only 2 words. I received it, and those 2 words are French toast. And this Friday, the 19th, the other half of the congregation who has not received it will receive it. And we live out in the boondocks in South Carolina, so if we got it, you all should be getting it. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stefan to make introductions. Stefan?
Good morning, everyone. There's been a lot of confusion over the last few years about Kabbalah, particularly with celebrities from the Los Angeles area and California area joining and studying. I think Madonna was one of the famous ones that were studying Kabbalah. And a lot of it was created misinformation and gave a lot of people the wrong idea about it, of what it is. So we asked Rabbi Groner to come and teach us today about Kabbalah, the source of it, the origins of it, and the true meaning of it. Rabbi Groner is the spiritual leader of Congregation Or HaTorah in Charlotte, and he's also a director of Lubavitch Educational Organization in the Carolinas. He started in this area around 1980, and the synagogue is also the Jewish Orthodox congregation of the Charlotte area. He's also the founder and director of the Charlotte Chabad House, which serves as a Jewish educational resource and outreach center for the Charlotte metro area. This includes weekly lectures on the Bible, Talmud, and Kabbalah. The Chabad House is an affiliate of the Lubavitch movement with its headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. He's also the founder with his wife, Mariashi, of the Jewish Day School of Charlotte, now the Charlotte Jewish Day School, and the Jewish Preschool on Sardis. The school has an enrollment of about 200 students. And my son was, by the way, a student of the school quite a few years ago. It's very, very successful right now. So I give a lot of credit to the education that he received there. Rabbi Groner, it's your show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. And hopefully we can shed some light on a subject that has fascinated people all around the world and demystify some of the mystical, which is not always easy. And, you know, Kabbalah is one of those things that it's sort of like it can lead you in so many different directions. And unfortunately, as Stefan mentioned before, celebrities have used it or misused it and given the wrong impression of what it really is. And it's actually a precious treasure that was given to each and every one of us. And it is available, it is accessible. However, if we use the right tools to open the box, so to speak, and examine it, it would be great. But let me give you just a little introduction before I go to the source and the root of it. If you ever go on a cruise, or even if you go on a boat on the ocean, so a lot of people are amazed by the beauty of the ocean, the marine life in the ocean, the scenery that they have. And I would say that even if a person has taken several trips and sailed several times on the ocean, whether it's the Atlantic or the Pacific, they'll come back with a lot of stories. Sometimes they'll see dolphins diving out, or they'll go whale watching, just to be able to see marine life. But to say that they actually experience marine life, that is not true. They have only touched the surface, so to speak. And a marine biologist will tell them right away that if you don't go deep sea diving and see what's really under and beneath the surface, and the deeper you dive, the more you realize the beauty of that universe that is not visible to the people that are up on top of the ocean. And actually, when you go deep sea diving, you realize that when you're looking at the surface, it's actually obstructing what's there. And for people that are timid from going deep sea diving, today we have, fortunately, many people that do that with their video cameras, and you have all kinds of TV shows on National Geographic or various other nature shows that show us exactly what it's like. But it reveals a secret that's there. So it doesn't reveal anything new. It's there, but it's hidden from us. And this is an exact example when we come to Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the theology of Judaism. Kabbalah is the soul of the Torah. Just like everything in this world has a body and a soul, similarly, the Torah has a body and a soul. The laws, the rituals, the history that's written in the Torah, that's the body of the Torah. The Kabbalah is the soul. And just like the soul cannot be seen, it can only be felt, it can be studied. Similarly, it is with Kabbalah. So that's just a general outline about what Kabbalah is. It's interesting that in the early years of Jewish history, the wisdom of Kabbalah was restricted only to the very erudite and the very spiritual and the very pious. It wasn't something that was shared with the masses. And it wasn't in order to sort of segregate one population from the other. It was because of the fear that the experts in Kabbalah had that it will be misused as we see it today. Interesting that in one of the tractates of the Talmud, and let me just give another little introduction because I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let me just give one more introduction and then we'll understand what Kabbalah is. And I do entertain any kind of questions. There'll be Q&A after that, after I finish. So please, if you have any questions, make sure to make a note of it. And hopefully I will be able to respond to it. So first, we need to establish something that Maimonides, the great sage, the great Jewish sage, teaches in his commentary on the Talmud. And he says that the Torah, even the body of the Torah, which is not the Kabbalah alone, has a written part and an oral part. And you've probably heard of the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah refers mainly to the first 5 books, the 5 books of Moses, and the oral Torah refers to the narrative that comes along with it. Now, there are other Bible books as well, which are included in the written Torah. However, all of the Bible books, starting from Joshua, going through the book of Psalms, do not contain any new laws. In other words, all the laws that were given to the Jewish people, which are considered biblical laws, they were only given to Moses. And after Moses' death, there were no new laws that were introduced to the Jewish people. There were no laws that were taken away or detracted. And it numbers 613 commandments, 248 positive, 365 negative. Now, when Moses taught the Torah, he gave an oral narrative together with it. That in Hebrew is called Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebal Peh literally translates as Torah that's by heart, but it's the oral narrative that he gave along with it. In this oral narrative, there are 3 columns. One column, as Maimonides explains, is the received. It means that it was received from teacher to pupil, from generation to generation. And that is the narrative. Then there is, like, for instance, even how to read the Hebrew letters, how to read the Bible, because as you know, the Torah in its origin is written without vowels. It's also written without commas. It's written without periods. So in order for us to be able to read the Torah and know how to read it in Hebrew and where to start, where to stop, all of that is what's called the oral narrative that was given by Moshe, that was received. Another section of the oral Torah is what we call derived. Those are laws that are derived according to the 13 principles of the Torah, which now is not the time to talk about it, but just for your information to know that that's a column that's called derived. And then there's a 3rd column, which is called legislated. And that's the permission that was given to the sages that when they saw it necessary to legislate a rule in order to protect the integrity of the Torah, they had the right to do so. So those are the 3 columns. In this column received, there are two levels. One level is the received law, and the other one is the received mystical information, which is the soul of the Torah that I mentioned before. Interestingly, in the legal vernacular of the Talmud, both of them are called Kabbalah, because the literal translation of the word, the Hebrew word Kabbalah, means received. Kibel, Moshe Kibel Torah, the first words of Ethics of Our Father begins with Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. So etymologically, the word Kibel is rooted in the word Kabbalah, which means the received. That's the meaning of the received. Received means that it was an oral transmission that was not recorded in the Bible, and it was orally transmitted from generation to generation. Now, the reason why Jewish mysticism retained the word Kabbalah, and it's still called Kabbalah, because eventually the received narrative that deals with Jewish law and ritual was written down. It was written down in the Mishnah. It was written down by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, after the destruction of the Second Temple in the time of the Roman occupation of Israel, when Jews were being dispersed and exiled out of Israel to countries all over the world. Rabbi Judah the Prince was worried that people will forget the tradition. So even though until then the oral Torah was transmitted orally, he made the decision to have it written down, at least in code, in the form of the Mishnah, so that there will be a record, a written record of the discussions of the oral law, so it will not get lost. That was the beginning of the writing of the oral law. So then that part of the oral law got the name Talmud. Talmud means to study. It was to be, these documents were to be studied. The part of the Torah that he never authorized that should be written down in his day was the mystical part. And that remained with the name Kabbalah, that it was still being orally transmitted. And there was a reason why they did not want to write it down. The Mishnah itself says it in the tractate of Chagiga, where it says that 4 entered into the orchard. Very famous Mishnah. It says, Arba'a nichnesu lepardes. 4 people entered into the orchard. Only one entered in peace and came out in peace, and the other 3 did not come out in peace. One died, one went ill, mentally ill, and the 3rd one just removed himself from society, period. And the 4th one was Rabbi Akiva, and he went in peace and went out in peace. Now, what orchard are we talking about here? Is it a lemon orchard? Is it an esrog orchard? What kind of orchard is this? So it's a code that the Mishnah is talking about when it says the word orchard. What is orchard? So you'll bear with me a little bit, and I will explain what this orchard is, and this explains the origin of the Kabbalah. The Hebrew word for orchard is pardes. You ask any Israeli that lives in Israel and they want to go out to the orchard, they go to the pardes. In the ancient Hebrew, it's pardes. In modern Hebrew, it's pardes, but it's the same thing, pardes. Pardes means an orchard. Now, the word pardes is made up of 4 Hebrew letters. The first Hebrew letter is a pei, which sounds like a P. The second Hebrew letter is a resh, which sounds like an R. That's where you have the par. The third Hebrew letter is a dalet, which is a D. And the 4th Hebrew letter is a samach, which sounds like an S. So if you take out the vowels, because Hebrew is written without the vowels, you have the word pardes, pei, resh, dalet, samach, which is PRDS. Spell it like PARDES if you fill in the vowels, and there you have pardes. Pardes is 4 letters, which indicates 4 layers to the Torah. The first layer to the Torah is the straightforward meaning. The straightforward meaning. The Hebrew word for that is pshat. Pshat means the simple, straightforward meaning. So let's take a verse. The first verse of the Torah, and I'm going to use that as an example. The first verse of the Torah is Bereshit bara Elokim, that in the beginning, it's translated in English, in the beginning, God created. Bereshit bara, in the beginning created God. God created, it's a little, the grammar in Hebrew is a little different than English, but it basically means in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So it says Bereshit bara Elokim. When we translate it, that in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth, that was the first part of creation. That's the simple, straightforward meaning of that verse. That's layer number 1. Then you have a second layer. The second layer is the R. The R is the Hebrew word remez. What does remez mean? Remez in Hebrew is translated as a hint. If, let's say, 2 people are in a conversation and a 3rd person walks in, and you don't want that person should hear your conversation, so you'll hint with your eyes that let's change the subject. So the Hebrew word to say you hint is ramaz lo be'einav, which means he hinted with his eyes. So ramaz comes from the word remez, which means hint. And that is that there are certain hints that are in the Torah, and that could be on many levels. One, for instance, is numerology. Numerology means the numeric value of a letter or the numeric value of a word. So for instance, take a simple word, Abba, which is father, or Ima, which is mother. So the numeric value for Abba, it's Aleph, Bet, Aleph, is 4. The numeric value for Ima is Aleph, Mem, Aleph, is 42. So there is a science in numerology that when you see similar words that have the same numerals, they hint that there is a connection between them. So that is an interesting way of learning. It's called the gematria, which is also called remez. And some Hebrew Bibles actually have a commentary, which is called the Baal HaTurim, that he wrote these numerals and this numerology as a commentary. So people that are interested in studying can study it that way. So that's a second layer. I'm only giving it as an example because I want to talk really more about the Kabbalah. The third level, the third layer is Dalet, which is Drash. Drash means the Midrash. The Midrash is learning at a deeper level, that it goes beyond the surface. So for instance, if you look at the first words, Bereshit bara Elokim, then in the beginning Elokim created. So I'm going to give you some samples of Midrash. Midrash says Bereshit can be split into two words, Beit Reshit, that there are two beginnings. It means there are two causes why the world was created. One was that there should be humans on the world, and number two, that they should have a mission, which is described in the Torah. So, so basically, the bet means there are two purposes for the creation. That's hinted right there. Another midrashic statement, which is brought down by one of the famous commentators on the Torah by the name of Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, known as Rashi, will say that God has many names. Each name doesn't determine a different God. It just determines a different revelation of God in the world. And there's a specific reason why Elokim is used at first. Elokim is the name of judgment. And at the beginning, when God created the world, this is Midrashic. In the beginning, when God created the world, he used the power of judgment. He saw that the world cannot be sustained. So later he added the other name, which is the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and that denotes his compassion and his mercy. And he fused together judgment and mercy in order to allow the world to sustain itself. So that's a layer on the Midrashic. And I'm only mentioning it just as a reference point. I know it generates a lot of questions, but those are the three layers. The fourth layer is the Samach, which Samach stands for the word Sod. Sod means the secret, or the mystical secret. And that is what we usually refer to as Kabbalah. And that most people do not have or did not have access to. And I will give you a demonstration in a minute, what is the sod in regards to that first verse. But what the Mishnah is saying, that four people entered into the orchard, means to say that they entered into the complete orchard. They immersed themselves in the Torah, not only on the first three layers, but they immersed themselves in the Torah in the fourth layer as well, which was the mystical. And it was so overpowering that one of them was so taken with the spirituality and the godliness that he found in it, that he wanted to be one with God, and he wanted to leave his body, and that caused him to die. The other one was totally overwhelmed by the power of Kabbalah, that it caused his circuits in his brain to crash. And the third person was so overpowered, and he said, if I can't do it all, I'd rather do nothing. And therefore he went into isolation. The only one who came out in peace and actually used it in a proper way was Rabbi Akiva. And that is a testament to Rabbi Akiva's greatness. So what is this secret here that we're talking about? So I'm going to go back to, I will try to share one screen because I have all of these in slides, but it can become very confusing. And I've also found that on Zoom, slides don't always work and it gets confusing. So I'd rather illustrate it to you just with my words. So if you look at the first words of Genesis, which says Bereshit bara Elokim, Kabbalah comes along and says that there is another secret hidden here. And it says Barashis, Barashet. What is Shet? Shet is six. That God used 6 faculties through which to create the world. And the most dominant was the faculty of Elokim. That's what Kabbalah says. Now, what does that mean? What are the 6 faculties? So in order to understand this, and this is going to be a little philosophical, and I hope you can bear with me on this. So in order to understand the divine faculties, which Kabbalah is based on the divine faculties, and more specifically on the 10 Sfirot, which I'm hoping to put up on the screen in a minute if I can. The 10 Sfirot is something which is talked about a lot in Kabbalah, and it's actually the basis for a lot of Kabbalistic wisdom. So where does this come from? And what does it have to do with the 6? And what are these 6? And what is the name of Elohim? And what does it mean to us? So in order to understand this, we find another verse in Genesis where God says that the Adam, which Adam was a male and a female, half male, half female, it was 2 bodies connected as one, as the Talmud says, and the operation was to separate the 2 into 2 different people, into 2 independent people. Just parenthetically, the concept that Eve was created from Adam's rib is not a Jewish term. It's not a Jewish interpretation. There are other religions that say that because they wanted to subordinate their wives or the women, so they said that all they are is a rib. The Hebrew word is tsela, and tsela we find later when God commanded the construction of the temple, that an entire side is called a tsela. So there were 2 sides to the Adam. One side was male, one side was female. They were Siamese, they were connected by their backs. And then the surgery was to separate them and that they should be able to see each other face to face. Now is not the time to discuss why God did it initially that way, but for whatever reason, that was the Adam. But it says, let us create the Adam in our image and our form. What is this all about? I'm sure everybody heard this verse. God says that we were created in the image of God, and he says it in the plural. Now we know that there's only one God. There are no 2 gods or 3 gods. There's no multiplicity in God. And that's a verse that Jews recite every day, twice a day, when we say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, God our Lord is one. And on the simplest level, it means one and not 2. There's no duality, there's no trinity, there's no multiplicity. That is the uniqueness of Judaism. So what does it mean in our image and in our form? So that is where you need to have Kabbalah. And the first book of Kabbalah was written in the time of the Mishnah, and it was called Sefer HaYetzirah. That's one of the first books on Kabbalah. And Sefer HaYetzirah was written even before the Zohar, and over there he explains that God reveals his essence through the 10 faculties. And these 10 faculties are shaped like the human being. And the human being is created in the image of God because the human being is the only species that was created in the image of these 10 faculties. So I want to talk a little bit about that and try to understand what that means. Let me see if I can share the screen now. Ooh. Okay, I don't know how well you can see this. If you look at the screen, it's a little small. That's why I don't like to use it. But you see, I'm going to point with my cursor here, the blue background. So you see 3 rounds, a bunch of rounds. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These, oops. Okay. Do you see it better now? Is it there? Okay, very good. So this is the typical image that we have of the 10 Sfirot through which God revealed himself. So let me stop here a second for a moment. First of all, we need to understand that God's existence is different than human existence. God's existence is nothing comparable to a human existence. A human is made up of many parts, many organs, and many faculties. God is, when it says God is one, which that's the Kabbalistic term of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, it means that God is one, not composed of any parts. It's a oneness unlike any other one that's existent in the world. Every existence is made up of cells, is made up of many, many tiny little components, but God is totally one. So there's no multiplicity in God. So the question that Kabbalah asks, is how can from God, who is a perfect one, how can it be derived from God that there should be so many multiple different kinds of creations? And one of the earliest Kabbalistic scholars, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, explains, and he gives an example. And even though the example is not a perfect example, but at least allows us to imagine it. And he says, imagine if you have sunlight coming into your house through a window. So it's a very bright light. So you decide that you want to filter it with a screen. So you want to color the window, you want to paint the window. So you're going to get a tinted glass or a painted glass or art glass, but it's going to have multiple colors. One section is going to be blue, one section is going to be red, one is going to be green, one is going to be yellow, one might be black, one might be brown, whatever colors you have. And you're going to you're going to have this painted or tinted glass artfully done where towards the east, where the sun comes in. And now the sunlight is coming in screened, but it's also coming in multiple colors. So you can see rays that are blue, rays that are red, rays that are green, rays that are black, rays that are brown, pink, purple, violet, any kind of color, depending on what you put up on the glass. So is there a change in the character of the sunlight? Does the sunlight now become multiple? The answer is no. It's still the same pure sunlight. However, because it goes through the filter, it appears as different colors and also different levels. The thicker the screen, the more condensed the light is, or the more contracted the light is. Similarly, Kabbalah introduces, based on the Sefer Yetzirah that I mentioned before, that when God brought in the divine energy into the world to create the world, he created this screen. And the screen are these 10 different faculties through which the divine light comes into the world. And for that reason, you have multiplicity and you also have variations. In some cases, the light is stronger. In some cases, the light is weaker. And that is the concept of the 10 Sfirot. The 10 Sfirot are not random. They actually have an order and a system. And the only species in the entire universe that was created as a replica of these 10 Sfirot is the human being. And that's the meaning that the human being is created in the image of God. We are all a reflection of that divine revelation to God. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview here to understand this. The three top, which form a triangle, are the three intellectual faculties that a person has, and it's Chachma, Keter, and Bina. Now, Chachma, Keter, and Bina, Keter is interchanged with something which is called Dat, which is knowledge, and then it would be a triangle that's upside down, and that's where the word Chabad comes from. Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Those are the intellectual faculties. A human being, every human being possesses those intellectual faculties. We have the ability to perceive and conceive ideas. The conception of an idea is Chachma. Bina is the analysis of an idea. Keter, or if you call it Dat, is the idea, is the ability to bond with it and to make it part of your knowledge. It's not just that you understand it, but you truly grasp it to the point that now you can teach it to someone else. Every human being has that capability, and that's usually found in our head, in our brain. So that represents the three intellectual faculties that God revealed in the world first. And then you will see beneath it 6. These 6, on the right side, you see Chesed. The colors are irrelevant for this art because the colors are different things, so we won't pay attention to that. So on the right side, you have Chesed. On the left side, you have Din. Chesed is kindness. Kindness means a flow that comes from you unrestricted in an indiscriminate way. That's Chesed. Din is the polar opposite of Chesed. Din is judgment. Judgment means that you withhold and you only give to those that are in need. Tiferet is beauty, and that's usually meant compassion, because compassion is able to fuse the two, as I will explain. But these are the three top emotional faculties. Okay, and then the three bottom emotional, we're not going to the black one on the bottom, but the three bottom emotional is Netzach. Netzach means victory or endurance. That's when a person has the principles that they're able to endure their emotional feelings. Hod is a bit of an aloofness that a person might have. And then you have Yesod, which is a faculty, and that is able to bring together all the emotions. So I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but I wanted to bring to you this chart because you should see the six. This six, these are emotions. And this is the emotional faculties that Kabbalah is saying through which God created the world. So let's go back to the verse Bereshis. Bereshis means Bereshis, that God used the six faculties through which to create the world. Not only that, it also says that God created the world in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested. The 6 days that it says that God created the world refers to these six faculties. The first day was the faculty of chesed, of kindness. The second day was the faculty of din, of judgment. The third day was the faculty of tiferet, which is compassion. And Wednesday, which was the fourth day, was netzach, was victory and endurance. Thursday was hod, which is aloofness. And yesod, which is bringing it together, is on Friday. And then we'll get to the bottom, which that represents Shabbat, but Shabbat is not one of the days of creation. Shabbat, as you see, it says Shechina is the day of the divine revelation. So here is a little example of taking the first verse of the Torah and seeing it through the prism of the 4 layers. But when you get to the 4th layer, which is Kabbalah, it opens up a whole universe. And this universe explains to us the theology and the true principles of Judaism and what it demands from us. It opens up the soul of Judaism and it reaches to the soul of humanity, of how it affects the soul. So if I have a few more moments before we open up to Q&A, I now would like to explain these 6 faculties, if that's fine, so that we can make it practical. And maybe another time we'll talk about the intellectual faculties. So let's go to the emotional faculties because that is through which God created the world. So let's talk for a moment the difference between intellectual and emotional, okay? And it may sound a little philosophical, it is. This actually comes from Maimonides in a book that he wrote, Guide to the Perplexed. Now, I'm going to stop for a moment now and just ask if everyone is following and if everybody feels fine. You can unmute yourself or raise your hand or say, or I don't know which way you want to communicate, but I hope that until now, this is something which resonates with everybody. I have to see if I can see everybody.
Doing fine, Rabbi.
We're doing fine. Okay, very good. Thank you. So I'm now going to talk about the difference between intellectual and emotional for a moment. The pure function of intellect is to analyze. If you were able to isolate the intellect from the rest of the body, and you would look at its function, the function of the intellect is to analyze everything that's outside of it and to internalize it. So intellectualism doesn't necessarily think about how it affects you. Intellectualism is like a computer, and the computer that's trying to compute the information. That's what intellectualism does. In the world of intellectualism, there's no such thing as good or bad, because good or bad is a relevant term. In the world of intellectualism, Maimonides says, the only thing that exists is true or false. So 2 + 2 is 4, right? A parent is older than their child is a truth. That's not a that's not good or bad. It's just a reality. If someone puts their finger into fire, it'll burn and hurt them. That's true. Is it good or bad? Intellect strikes out there. If intellect was not connected to the heart, Emotions, on the other hand, is not about analyzing. Emotions is processing the information, how I relate to others and how others relate to me. Emotions are about love. Emotions are about compassion. Emotions could be even about withdrawal. If I withdraw from someone else, it's all about my interaction with each other. Now, if a human being only operates with their intellectual faculties and they don't have the emotional faculties, I would call them a refrigerator, because they would be so cold to society, because everything is processed like a computer. It's very hard to have a relationship with a computer. A computer, all it does is compute. On the other hand, if you have someone that only operates on their emotions, but their intellect is not in existence, then I call them a teenager, because their whole life is all about emotions. Is it good for me or bad for me? A teenager, even though they have a little intellect, but the intellect is dominated by the emotions. So if you ask a teenager, does this sound right to you? So if their heart is in it, they'll say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But an adult, a grown-up, knows how to integrate the intellect with the emotions. And this integration is not only the integration of the intellect and the emotions, but all the emotions and all the intellect with each other. That's why you have all these bars here. However, the point of relationship with another person, even if it's intellectual, always goes through the emotions. Because when you connect to another person, there is an emotional tie, whether it's a parent and a child, or a teacher and a pupil, or even if you go to a service desk, there has to be some sort of connection there. Usually we're turned off when a service agent is very cold and unemotional and uninvolved. You want them to show some sort of empathy. So it should be through the emotions. So that's why the emotions is all about outside of yourself. So when it came to the time of creation, God was creating an entity outside of his own, outside of himself. So in order to create an entity, even though there was a lot of intellectual thought in it, but what was revealed were only the emotional aspects of it. And those were the 6 emotional aspects that came out. And I'm going to give you an example now of the top 3, just because of our time constraint. And actually, it's interesting that according to Kabbalah, Sunday is defined mainly by chesed, and Monday is defined mainly by din, which is judgment, and Tuesday is defined mainly by tiferet. And I will explain that as we go along. So what is chesed? The definition of kindness is not compassionate. A kind person is not a compassionate person. A kind person is a person that their essence is that they give. They give even to those that are unworthy. They give to those that are worthy. Their whole essence of life is to give. They give emotion, they give love, they can give money, they can give gifts, they can give their time. They have no breaks. You know, it's the story is told that there was once a fire in a lumber yard in some county, and the blaze was so strong that all of the fire trucks that came and the firefighters that came, they couldn't get close enough to put out the fire. All of a sudden, a small little country village fire truck came with a few firemen, and they were racing down the road, and they went right into the lumber yard, and they jumped off and they put out the fire. So later there was a whole ceremony to honor them, and they gave them a big award of $50,000. And they asked the fire captain, what's the first thing you're going to do to buy? What is the first thing you're going to buy with this $50,000? And he answers, we'll get new brakes on our fire truck. So basically, kindness means that you give, and you don't know when to stop. And kindness is not necessarily associated with the term good, because let's say if you have a child or a grandchild in our case, who always wants to eat candy, and you want to be good and give them candy, that's not necessarily good, because candy is not necessarily the best snack for a child. So chesed is not a definition of good or bad. Chesed is just a motion of constantly giving. Water, for instance, is likened to chesed because water flows from above to below. And unless you stop it, it continuously flows, as we know. So that's chesed. Din, which is judgment, is just the opposite. Judgment is that you don't give at all, and you're very tight, and you withdraw and withhold. And even if you see somebody that's desperately in need, you're constantly questioning whether they really need it or not, and whether they're faking it, and perhaps they can go to work and they shouldn't get. That's the concept of judgment. Judgment denies, and it's likened to fire in a way. It goes from above to below, but the point over here is that it's restraint. In fact, the Mishnah says, the Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers speaks about a gibor, someone that's very strong and mighty, and says who's truly mighty? The one that can control their heart, the one that can conquer their heart. In other words, they can restrain themselves. So that's the polar opposite of chesed. Tiferet is in the middle, which Tiferet, by the way, chesed is the right side, which right, this is not political, by the way. It's right, which means that it's constantly giving. And din is restraint. A human being was created to be balanced. And that's why we have 3 columns, because the third column, which is the middle column, is supposed to fuse the right and the left and create an element, which is the third element. And the third element is where you find Tiferet, which is compassion. What is compassion? Compassion means that you're able to fuse the kindness and giving together with judgment. So let's say, for instance, a kind person that has $1,000 cash in his hand, and he walks out of his office building and he sees people standing. He decides the first 10 people that he sees, he's going to give them each a $100 bill. No questions asked. But could be the people that he's giving $100 to are people that are much wealthier than he is, and they don't need it. So, but that doesn't matter, because chesed is all about giving indiscriminately. Din is just the opposite. Din is withholding. Withholding means that even if they go and they see people, barefoot and wearing rags and starving, so they're not going to give to anybody. They'll have to make a judgment to see whether these people are legitimate and do a whole reference check and then decide maybe yes, maybe not, maybe it's better that they shouldn't get. That's the concept of din. Tiferet is compassion. Compassion is that if the person has $1,000 and he goes out and he says, oh, I see some homeless people there with their tents, I'll give each of them $100 so that it'll make their day better. So the homelessness brings out the compassion in the person, that he feels or she feels that they want to give, but they give to those that they feel that are in need. So the ability to fuse the unlimited, unrestricted notion of giving with the judgment produces the third kind, which is the element that's in the middle, which is Tiferet. And that ability to fuse the right and the left is actually a human talent that no other species has. And that is what makes this this diagram here so unique, that we're created in the image of God, is not only that we have the intellect more than any other species, and not only that we have emotions, because other species also have emotions, but the ability that we can fuse them together and make them into the third element, which is the 3 columns. One other parenthetical point, Kabbalah discusses tikkun olam. What does tikkun olam mean? So tikkun olam means the following. It says in Genesis that in the beginning of creation, the land was tohu. Va'aretz haya tohu vavohu. Tohu means chaotic. Vohu means void. So it says that the first rendering of God's creation of the world only had 2 columns. It had a right and it had a left. And because it had a right and a left, it was so powerful, they were so polarized that they couldn't coexist, that the entire universe crashed, so to speak. And then God recreated the world and said tikkun, that it has to be corrected, it has to be balanced. And our job is to correct the chaos of tohu and bring it to the level of tikkun, which is a balanced way, which is with the 3 columns. And I think that this Kabbalistic narrative resonates very well with people today in today's political climate, not to go too deep in politics, which I do not want to go into politics, but nevertheless, the idea that we live in a very polarized society, it is creating a lot of angst, and that is the concept of toh. It can cause the society to crash. Tikkun is when you have balance, and balance brings balance between the two sides, and that's with the third column. So to bring this concept into perspective of the word of Genesis, on Sunday, there's an unlimited flow of God's kindness. And in fact, on the first Sunday, according to the description of Genesis, the world was filled with light, unrestricted light. And God said, I saw it was good. Monday was the day that God restricted the light, restricted the heavens, and split everything, which is the idea of judgment. And in fact, if you look in the portion of Genesis, it does not say on Monday that God saw it was good. The word good did not exist on Monday because of the split and the judgment. That's where Blue Mondays come from, actually. According to Kabbalah, Monday is a day that could have judgmental or negative energy, and it's a harder challenge on Monday to initiate things because it has that judgment aspect to it. Tuesday is the day of the compassion. And actually Tuesday, it says twice that it was good, which means that it fused the right and the left, it fused heaven and earth, and that is the idea of compassion. So Tuesday is a very special day according to Kabbalah. So now when we look at the first statement of Genesis, the first three words, it opens up a whole new vista for us to understand a lot of things that we just discussed. That number one, God is one and only, but nevertheless, his divine energy comes through in multiple forms and shapes, each one coordinated in a very special way. And not only that, but he created the human being in his image because he created the human as God's emissary to fulfill the mission and to be partners. The humans have a unique mission, and it doesn't make us conceited. It doesn't make us feel that the world was created for us and we can destroy it. It means that we are the custodians of the world. We were given the responsibility to perfect the world and reveal the godliness and the divinity that's in it. So that's the next thing, that we were created in the image of God, and that we all have a soul and we have the ability to do that. That's only in the first three words, Bereshit bara. We didn't even, the first two words, we didn't even come to the word Elohim. The word Elohim, or as we pronounce it in Hebrew, Elohim, is actually expressed in the bottom circle, which is called the Shekhinah, and I can explain that as well, but I want to take a break, a stop, just in case people have questions. I will stop the share so I can see everybody, and we will now see if people have questions. I can go on till tomorrow if you want, but I definitely want to hear your feedback so far. Everybody good? Okay, if that's the case, I will explain the Shekhinah, which you saw before, which is that bottom circle. The Shekhinah is actually feminine. It's the feminine aspect of God. The Shekhinah literally means the divine presence in the world. That's what the Shekhinah means. Shekhinah comes from the word shachen. Now, if you ask any Israeli, what does shachen mean? What does a shachen mean? Shachen means someone that dwells next to you, a neighbor, right? Shochen, he dwells and rests. It's the aspect of God that dwells and manifests itself in the world. It's the 10th faculty, and that is called the kingship of God, Malchut, but it's the Shekhinah, which actually is the conduit that brings all of the 10 sphirot, all of the 9 preceding sphirot into the world. Every one of the sphirot that we mentioned before, can only come through Malchut, through the kingship of God. Now, what does Malchut do? I'm going to give you one example that Kabbalah gives. Kabbalah says that the Torah instructs us, and we actually read it last Shabbat, and before the Israelites went out of Egypt, God created the Jewish calendar. And God said that the calendar, the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, needs to follow the moon. And we have Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is the first day of the new moon. Then we have the 15th of the month when the moon is a full moon. Then we have the end of the month when the moon recedes. And the word month actually is reflected in the concept of moon. So for that reason, a Jewish Hebrew year has 355 days, except when it's a leap year. The solar year, which that's the Gregorian calendar, the secular calendar, has 365 days. So the lunar year runs a deficit of an average of 10 to 10 and a half days a year. That's why, for instance, this year is the year that the deficit is most noticeable, because Passover starts in March. Usually you associate Passover with April. But why is Passover in March? Because we've had this deficit, and next year will be what they call a leap year when we add an extra month. So we have to balance the year, this lunar year, with the solar year, because the Torah says that Passover always has to be in the spring. It has to be seasonal. And from there, Moses learned that you have to add every 3 years another month. But why is it so important for us to follow the moon? Because the moon represents the Shekhinah. What is the function of the moon, and why is the moon so special? The moon doesn't have its own, the moon uses the light, the moon is able to take the sunlight and redistill it and re-shine it in a very delicate way, in a beautiful way into the world, which the sun can't. The sun is more aggressive. And just wait till July and August come, and we will not complain about the cold anymore. We will complain about the heat, because the sun is so strong. It radiates, it doesn't discriminate between one to the other. It's very, very strong. But the light that comes from the moon actually is distilled in a way, sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not. But when it's a full moon and it's a clear night and a crisp night, and you go outside and you see the moonlight, there is a very special feeling about that. And that's the concept of the feminine light that comes from the moon. And the Shekhinah is Malchut, which is also the feminine light of God that comes in a way that it's very, very delicate. It's also very beautiful. And it's also something that manifests itself in a very, very adjusted way to the world. That's what the function of Shekhinah is, which is Malchut. So when we say that God created the world, Bereshit bara Elokim, so Elokim usually is reserved for judgment. But there is also a part of Elokim, which is that concept of Malchut, that is able to reproject the light in a very delicate way and in a nice way, which is the Shekhinah, the way it manifests itself in the world. It's only a manifestation of the divine, but that's what Malchut is. Now, let's transpose it in human terms, what it means to a human being. We talked before about the intellect, and we talked about the emotions. Now, when a person wants to convey their emotional feelings to another individual, so the more mature the person is, the more careful they are in how they express their emotions. It also depends on their level of comfort. And it also depends who the recipient is. So if you're trying to show emotions to a small toddler, so you're not going to read a poem to them, you're probably going to pick them up and give them a hug. Hopefully you're vaccinated so you can do that. You pick them up and you give them a hug and a kiss, and you embrace them and you say words that they can understand. But if you're going to meet another person that's a grown-up, and you're going to want to show emotion and you're going to hug them and pick them up, it's not going to be right, especially if it's a stranger. So we sort of measure our words and we allow the words to flow in a proper way. That ability to be able to express our thoughts and our emotions verbally in a way that it can truly affect another person and that it truly conveys the feeling that we're feeling, that is the Shekhinah within us. That is the Malchut that's within us. Again, only the human being has that ability. An animal, when it shows its emotions, it shows raw emotions. A human being has a way to temper it, and it knows when to lift it and to raise the temperature, to lower the temperature, so to speak. And that is, again, a gift that is given to the human being, which is this concept of Malchut, which that was that last on the bottom, which is called the Shekhinah. So when God created the world and he revealed the 6 emotive faculties, they all had to go through the Malchut in order to project itself and shine in this world and to create the world. So what I've given you here is a little taste of the Kabbalah on its theological meditative concept. There is another part of Kabbalah which is called the practical Kabbalah, and that is that great Kabbalistic scholars going back from the early days knew how to apply the Kabbalah in a physical way, and they knew how to utilize colors and specific words, and some people thought that it was magic. The Kabbalistic scholars of the Middle Ages, starting with Rabbi Yitzchak Lurie, and subsequently with all the great Kabbalistic scholars that came after that, forbade anyone from using that practical Kabbalah because it was being misused. And anyone that peddles practical Kabbalah today with red strings and magical statements and all of that is violating the edict of these great Kabbalistic scholars that have actually introduced Kabbalah. And they have taught us Kabbalah that we should have a better understanding of the world. We should have a better understanding of the interaction between God and the world, between humans and each other, but not meant to make magic out of it or to use God's holy name just to be able to perform miracles or to override nature. So in today's times, that is not authentic. The very notion that someone might claim that they have access to it and that they are using it, that itself is the disqualifier. That tells you immediately that they're not really part of the Kabbalah. They know the fringe surface aspect of Kabbalah. They don't really get the inner aspect of Kabbalah, and they're just misusing it. True Kabbalistic scholars that study Kabbalah are very internal, very private, and they don't even let anyone know what they know, and they don't use it to try to influence the world one way or another. So Kabbalah is really there for us to be able to understand our mission. It answers a tremendous amount of questions, and it goes into a host of ideas and theologies. And it actually is important for Jews to study at least some aspects of Kabbalah because of the challenges that we have today from other religions, the challenge that we have from other philosophies, just to understand what Judaism is. And I will tell you 2 recent scholars that passed away who have written a lot about it. One was Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz in Jerusalem, who coined the word that Kabbalah is the theology of Judaism, and Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, that I know that you're going to have a whole presentation about him. He actually took a lot of work, especially the Rebbe's work. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, who was the 7th Chabad Rebbe, was considered and still is considered the foremost expert of Kabbalah in our time. And Jonathan Sachs made it a mission to compile a according to the Torah portions, essays of Kabbalah that were written in Hebrew and to translate it into English. It's called Torah studies, that he translated and explained the Rebbe's work so we can have a better understanding of the Kabbalistic terms. And what they both said is important for us to know the theology of Judaism, because Jews need to know what we really believe. We don't define Judaism by saying we don't believe what the Christians believe. It's true we don't believe what the Christians believe, that doesn't define us. Remember, Christianity came much later than Judaism. Judaism introduced a concept of theology, a monotheistic concept of theology that was revolutionary, that changed the whole landscape of the world. And we need to understand what it is. We have to be proud in it. And it is an amazing journey just to understand what we truly believe. And Kabbalah helps us unpack that and go into the depth of that. So that's my little introduction to Kabbalah. And if anyone has any questions or Q&A, please feel free to ask.
Rabbi, if we're interested in studying Kabbalah past self-study reading, is there anywhere in Charlotte where we can go as Reformed Jews with our background and study this?
So we do offer some Kabbalah classes. I would stay away, and I'm not trying to denigrate anyone else, but I've seen too much. We have a program which is called JLI, Jewish Learning Institute. And we have 3 sessions every year. Each one is 6 sessions. And one session, usually the winter session, is always on Kabbalah. In the session that we just finished was Journey on the Soul. We even talked about reincarnation. What is the Jewish belief in the Kabbalistic belief in reincarnation and the afterlife? We are doing another one coming up now, but it's going to be on the Messianic. What do Jews believe about the Messiah? So we don't, and sometimes we do just pure Kabbalah, but every year we do one 6-week session on Kabbalah so that people can have a taste of it. But I like what you said. Kabbalah cannot be self-taught. It's impossible. And you can read and read and read, and I've done this myself. Had I not had teachers that taught me from my youth, and I had some of the best teachers, and I'm still learning from them because I listen to their recordings. Some of them are still around and they're still teaching. So I joined their classes and they have opened up for me a whole world. There's one scholar in particular that is what we call him the Einstein of Kabbalah, and he's writing the encyclopedia on it in Hebrew, of course. He's just given out the 9th volume and he's still up to the first letter, Aleph. So that's how deep it is. And so there's another scholar who was a great genius in Talmud, and he lives in Israel now, but he was originally in the United States. And I was listening to him recently. I've known him ever since he came into our circle. And he said that he used to teach himself Kabbalah, and he would read all the Kabbalistic books, and he was a great scholar of Talmud. And he could never really find the answers until he met this other rabbi, Rabbi Kahn, who we call the Einstein. And he said he was hesitant at first, but then he met with him for 2-3 hours and he put forth his questions and he was blown away. And he continued to study with him for many years until he moved to Israel. And he teaches his students now, and he was telling his students that that even if one is a great scholar, if you don't have someone teaching you the Kabbalah and giving you the tools through which to see it and understand it, you will grasp it, but you won't truly grasp the inside of the Kabbalah. So I like what you said, the self-taught. There's a lot to read on Kabbalah. There's so many sites. Listen, Chabad has been one of the foremost teachers of the mystical aspect of Judaism. If you go on Chabad.org, you type in Chabad, Kabbalah, it'll come up with all kinds of stuff. But I will tell you that as much as you read, it still lacks. We need to have classes. So we definitely have opportunities. And I think the JLI is one of those, and we do the JLI now through Zoom.
Rabbi,
Yes,
is each individual is made up of all 6 of those qualities?
each individual is actually made up of all 10.
Of all 10 of
All
the
10, so they
qualities?
have all 6, but they have all 10. Every
So
individual
that-
has it.
So the person who has Hesed is not going to overgive and become a burden on the society?
It's a very good question, and I like that question. So let me try to explain. We have, first of all, every human being is given all 10, but by some people, one faculty may be more dominant than another one. And the challenge is that we were given the ability to train ourselves to live a balanced life. So for instance, Maimonides says that people are born with different temperaments, and you have some people that are spenders or some people that are givers, and they have no restrictions. And then you have people that are on the other hand, the other side, that they're misers. So they have to work on themselves to be able to bring themselves to a balance. And the only one that is held up on that higher standard of responsibility of doing the work of creating the balance is the human being. You can tame an animal up to a point, but you can't train the animal to have balance. A human being can train themselves to have balance. But you're very right. For instance, there's a law in the Talmud that says that it's mandatory for a person to tithe. In other words, to give 10% of their earnings to charity. If they want to be extra kind, they can give up to 20%, but they should never give more than 20% unless they're a Bill Gates. They shouldn't give more than 20% because then they become a burden on the community. So if they're going to give too much, then they'll have to turn to the community and say to the community, please give me. So if one wants to give, they should give 10%. They can give 20%, but if they give to the point that now they become a recipient, then that's not balanced. That's not proper. Okay. Any other questions?
What's the relationship?
Rabbi, what is the relationship between Kabbalah and Zohar? You mentioned Zohar in passing, but I don't know what the difference is.
So Kabbalah is a name is a generic name for the whole theology and philosophy. Zohar is a specific book. Zohar means the splendor, and it was written, according to most opinions, by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva. The reason why no one knows the true author of the Zohar is because it was discovered as a scroll about 1,000 years after the authors of the Mishnah lived. And we know the name of the person who discovered it. And one thing is for sure, we know that he did not write it, because even though he wrote extensively, but the Zohar is written in a totally different style. The Zohar is written in Aramaic, of course, Hebrew characters, but Aramaic language. And it's very similar to the kinds of writing that was in the time of the Mishnah. So for that reason, experts concluded that even though the scroll was found 1,000 years after the Mishnah in a cave, but it was written in the time of the Mishnah. And being that the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his contemporaries are mentioned there, so they believe that it was written either by him and his and his study partners. But the Zohar is the foremost work that dates back to the time of the Mishnah, that and the Sefer Yetzirah. But then Kabbalah was developed mainly in Spain. We have to remember Spain in the Middle Ages, when I'm talking about the 11th, 12th, and 13th century, was actually the hub of Jewish life. Spain was like the United States is today. It was the most advanced country. It was the freest country, relatively speaking, and Jews held very prominent positions, and it allowed hundreds of thousands of Jews to flock to Spain and to study and open up study halls, and some of the great Kabbalistic scholars flowed there. But then when the problems in Spain arose, many of them escaped or exiled. Some of them moved to Israel. So later, the Kabbalah was developed in Israel by Rab Moshe Cordovero and then by the Arizal. And if you take a tour of this northern city of Tzfat, you will find that a lot of the Kabbalistic scholars lived there. But even then, the Kabbalah was written in an abstract form, using a terminology that most people are not used to. It was only in later years that they began to decipher it and explain it in a better way. And Chabad really has been, that's the foundation of the Chabad theology, going back 7 generations with the first founder of Chabad, which was part of the students and the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, is to take and expound the soul of Judaism, but also allowing us to demystify the mystical. Okay.
Thank you.
Hope that answers it. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
The circles, the one I can see where you have control over certain of them, but what about the mentally challenged person that's born with almost zero intellect or very poor? How does that fit into Kabbalah and the explanation? Because that circle is out of whack with all the other ones. It's not really under any almost direct control, maybe in very minute proportions.
It's a very good question. And
Uh-oh.
actually, it's a fantastic question, but I want you to know that it's discussed. It's not something which,
Okay. Well, I'm sure it was, and I want to hear possibly.
okay. So I cannot answer the why, the why God created that some people have their faculties closed off or not functioning like the other faculties is something that we can't understand. It can have something to do with reincarnation or their mission in life. So the fact of the matter is that everybody has all 10 faculties, but it could be that in some people, those faculties are dormant. It doesn't function properly, and it's overridden by the essence of the soul. And what I mean by that is, I actually reminded myself of a letter that I once saw from the Rebbe to the director of a facility that was specially made for children that are mentally challenged. The name of the school was Ohel, and some of the kids were there just for daytime for learning, but some of the kids actually had to be housed there because their parents, they were so beyond that their parents could not handle them. And the Rebbe then came out in the 70s with a campaign that when women are lighting the candles Friday evening before Shabbat, that to have little girls as well, that they should light the Shabbat. And he wanted that in every room there should be a charity box so the children are trained and learning how to care for others by putting coins or some of their allowance in the charity box to teach them to take care of the poor. So the director of this Ohel wrote to the Rebbe and he said, how do I deal with my children since they have it seems that they have no comprehension? And the Rebbe said, on the contrary, their souls are more alert than the souls of everybody else because it's not obstructed by these faculties. The purity of the soul is there. And he says that if you take a little girl that has this handicap or a little boy, and you give them something spiritual to do, it wakes something up in them, even though they don't show it, and it seems that they don't understand it, but their soul is awake, and they somehow override the circuitry. So let me explain it in Kabbalistic terms. It's interesting because we're coming to Passover now. Passover is a magnificent holiday because Passover is not just a day that commemorates something that happened in the past. Passover actually is celebrating something that happens every year. And what happened on the time of Passover? The time of Passover was a great miracle, revelation of God. And that was that he broke through the obstacle of freedom by crushing the oppressors, which that time was the Egyptians, and freeing the oppressed with the people of Israel and embracing them. And then not only that, there were other miracles as is described in the Talmud. Where does a miracle come from? A miracle comes from God when God overrides the ordinary system and infrastructure according to nature, which is found in these 10 faculties. So nature comes through from God through these 10 faculties. A miracle overrides that, but it doesn't last. It's only for the time. God will only use a miracle when it's necessary. The miracle means that there was a revelation of the infinite light of God that supersedes these 10 faculties, which is above nature. Miracles mean that it's not nature. Miracle means that nature is abolished. So for instance, when the Bible describes the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, that the water split and it became a wall, that's not a natural phenomena, that's a supernatural phenomena. The concept, according to Kabbalah, is actually that the hidden worlds were revealed and there was the divine infinite nature. The Rebbe writes in that letter that these children, that some of their faculties are not working, the infinite nature of the soul overrides the finite aspect, and therefore they're more in touch with the spirituality. And he says, on the contrary, these children need the spiritual stimuli more than anybody else, and it can talk to them and resonate with them. So according to Kabbalah, when you have somebody that may not have their mental capability or their mental function, and it seems on the outside as if they are less than anyone else, according to Kabbalah, they're more. And I want to tell you something that it's an anecdotal story, but we have a family. He was once the president of our synagogue. I can mention the name because they spoke about it in public, David and Janice Cantor. And they had a son, Jeremy, who as a child developed something that caused him to be mentally not there. In fact, he couldn't move on his own. He would only make animal sounds, and he needed a tremendous amount of treatment just to be able to live. But his mom had an unbelievable relationship with him, and you saw this all the time when they were together, the way he would coo, even when he was 25 years old, the way he would coo to her in his wheelchair and react to her. Now, there was one interesting thing, that a custom that the parents had, that on Shabbat, for Shabbat services, they would bring their child into our sanctuary and have him sit together with the mom. And sometimes you would hear him make these primordial sounds, and there were people that were irritated. Why are you bringing him in here? It's disturbing the service. And the mom actually kept on bringing. She asked me, so I said, continue bringing him here. And one time it was actually when he became very sick and he had to be hospitalized, she spoke to the congregation and she said, if you want to know why I brought him, is because I saw a kind of deep spiritual reaction and calmness in this child whenever I brought him into the sanctuary. He became a different person. He became content, fulfilled, and excited. So when you heard him making those sounds, it was a sound of appreciation. And she said, I can't explain it. Why? But I saw that this place was different than any other place where I would take him. I can take him to where children were, where there was a lot of stimuli. I can take him to the theater. Never that reaction. But when I brought him here in the community and sitting with us, there was this definite spiritual reaction. And that jives very well with that letter that I quoted before. We don't understand why God did it that way, but we definitely know that their souls are very powerful and strong and override the faculties. And for that reason, they deserve our attention, they deserve our help, and they deserve to be nurtured even more than others, and they relate and respond to spirituality.
What I think is really out of whack are the members who complained.
Oh, that's not out of whack. That's normal because people complained that they couldn't hear the cantor, they couldn't hear the sermon. You know how people are, and it's just a few people.
Right.
But you're right. But sometimes you have to have the foresight and to be able to see. There's another congregant that does the same thing. They have a daughter that's in that same situation, and they bring them to services from time to time. And the reason for that is because the child really loves it. You can see it. And I can't explain it. The only explanation I have is that there is something that happens with their soul that bypasses the faculties.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Are we good?
We are excellent. Thank you so much. It's absolutely fascinating. And I think we all appreciate it. And it's, as you say, it's just a tiny ray of light of an insight into a very, very complicated, complex subject. But it's a
Right.
It's like,
and
like
I
a
want
door
to-
opening. It's like a door opening.
Right. Right. And I just wanted to give you a little flavor or taste.
Thank you so much. Natalie, do we have time?
Yeah, definitely. If you're ready, I can put you guys in breakout rooms and you can stay as long as you want.
Okay. So we're going to join breakout rooms. All of you, thank you so much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks and learn about sleep, and have a wonderful Passover.
I see some Pesach.
And you too, you too. Happy Pesach.
Too. Do we want to join
Thank
it?
you, Rabbi Groner.
No. All right.